This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Tyler. My guest today is Natasha Mahtani. Natasha is an accredited relationship and divorce coach. I almost said she's based in London, but now I heard a month ago Natasha moved back to Lagos in West Africa, where she was born. And Natasha has clients all over the world. She will tell us more about her work. Natasha was born in Liberia, West Africa, to Indian parents and has lived in Liberia, England, Nigeria, India, Ireland, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And she's a mom of one son. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, Anna.
Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a bit of a mouthful.
It's an exciting mouthful.
Yeah.
I want to learn about all of these places and all your experiences and everything else.
Yeah, it's been quite an experience, but I always say to people, it's only because of that experience that I'm able to, now with what I do, understand those cultural nuances within relationships. It's really interesting the way, when things are happening, you're kind of like, what's the purpose? Like, why is this happening? And then you fast forward and you're like, that makes sense now.
Absolutely. So before we jump into your work, I want to talk about the culture. And we just spoke about it quickly before we started recording. You told me you're a Sindhi Indian and that Sindhi Indians were very entrepreneurial and traveled and moved all across the world. Will you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, of course. So Sindh was a province in India, and when the British left in 1947 and split the country into two, into India and Pakistan, Sindh fell into the Pakistan territory. But the majority of Sindhis, they were predominantly Hindu, so they had to flee. And it's actually one of, I think, the largest mass migration ever. But it's not something a lot of people know and talk about. And actually, that's changing now. There's a lot of amazing people writing really great books about it based on their grandparents' story. But a lot of them moved down into India, but not for a long time, just to kind of find their feet. And from there, they moved out. So they moved to West Africa, they moved to China and Hong Kong, the Philippines, parts of South America, the UK. And so my grandparents moved to West Africa, to Liberia. And so my dad was born there in 1957. And then my mum's family ended up moving there later and working there, and that's how they met. So yeah, they're very entrepreneurial because I guess they had to be. When you lose your land as such and you have to flee, you end up kind of hustling and doing something. So Sindhis are very entrepreneurial.
How did it happen that you moved around so much?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I always get people who ask me like, "Oh, your parents diplomats?" So no, they weren't. So I was born in Monrovia in Liberia, and when I was 3.5, civil war was breaking out. So we left and we moved to London because my dad had some family in London. But it was the time of Margaret Thatcher, and things were not always easy, especially if you wanted to, be self-made and have your own business. So we lived there for 3.5 years, and then when I was 7, my mum's family, who all lived in Nigeria, spoke to my parents. They were like, "Oh, why don't you, there's so many business opportunities, why don't you come back here?" So literally, my dad woke up one morning, and was just like, "Right, we're going to Lagos." It was as easy as that. And so I moved here when I was 7. And then when I was 11, I went to boarding school in India just to get a bit of the culture. And I was there for 3 years. And then my parents wanted me to have a European education, but in an English-speaking country. So it was England or Ireland. And back then they said the education system in Ireland was, exceeded England. So I went to Dublin, which was a real culture shock. If you can imagine going from India where they were really strict and, you could even like talk to a boy to moving to Ireland where it was a lot more open. I finished my schooling there and I went to university in London. And then I worked there for a while and then I got married quite young and I moved across to Asia and I lived between Hong Kong and Taiwan. And then just before my 30th birthday, I moved back with my 15-month-old to London. And we were there for 9 years. And yeah, as you said, in August, we moved to Lagos. So I feel like I've come full circle
You
and
really
ended up back in Lagos.
Does your husband have or ex-husband have a similar background like you?
He didn't move as much. So he grew up mainly in Asia and then went to university in Australia.
Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to move into your professional life. What did you study and how did you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so what I studied was completely unrelated. From the age of probably 15, I knew that I wanted to be a coach or a counselor. But to be perfectly honest, and this was something my mum said to me, which now I'm so grateful that she did, I was a real empath, but I didn't have kind of the emotional resilience. And so I wanted to change the world. And if anything was happening to anyone or things I saw around me, I would get really upset about it. So I didn't have that emotional resilience, but I had the empathy. And so it would bring my energy down totally. And she was like, you can do it if you like, but you have to find a way to protect your energy, because otherwise, every time a client says something to you, your vibration's going to lower and and then I end up falling sick and stuff like that. So instead, I went and did business management at King's College in London. I also enrolled in a second university and I started getting some qualifications to be a counselor. And then, like I said, I started working and got married. And when I lived in Hong Kong, I thought, no, I want to get this coaching qualification. So I ended up finishing it, distance learning. But again, I didn't start coaching because I then became a single parent and I moved back to London, and that was a very challenging time. But over the years, I kind of built up my own strength as such and built myself back up. And I started coaching. And I decided to niche down because I did some training with Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi. And they talked about, finding that one person you wanted to help. And I realized that having been through the divorce process myself, what exactly women, and more specifically women of color, go through, when they leave a relationship or choose to leave a marriage, of which many don't because it's just so difficult. It's such a stigma. There's still such a taboo attached to it. And so as I was doing that, I did some training, became an accredited divorce coach. But the more people I started coaching, the more I realized, you know what, actually, if some of these people had seen a relationship coach, when things started to kind of slip down, their relationships could have been salvaged, because I'm a big believer that it's not always about the other person, even if the person is quote unquote doing something to you. It's about taking personal responsibility. And if I realized that earlier, and if we all realized how powerful that could be within relationships, we could actually make those relationships work. Like, they didn't need to come to divorce's doors. So I did some further training and became an accredited relationship coach. And that's what I do now. And I have, like you said, I have clients globally.
Did you have clients where it worked out, which took over their personal responsibility?
Yes. So I have, I've mainly worked with women, but more recently I've started working with couples. And I'm actually so grateful because, like I said, when they come together, they want it to work. So that's great. And they have been able to learn how to communicate better, understand each other, know what their love language is, understand their different attachment styles. We're all living based on our experiences of the world. And so if you look back at how you were raised versus you look back the way your partner was raised, you can see why your belief systems are quite different. So even if you have similar values, like you value family or you value family time, the way in which you approach it is different based on the way you were raised.
Mm-hmm. Is there more you'd like to tell me about your coaching, or should we jump into talking about mom?
Yeah, let's jump into talking about mom.
So mom's name is
Karen.
Karen. Okay.
Yeah.
But spelled with I. This is what confused me. I just looked at my notes. I'm like, oh, how do I spell that? Tell me about her.
Yeah, so my mum, she was born in India. She was born in Bangalore. And then when she was 2, she moved across to Hyderabad. If you see her, she doesn't look Indian. So she's very, very, very fair. So our whole lives, people have always thought my dad's like the Indian married to a foreigner. And it's actually the opposite, because she was raised in India and he was raised in Africa and the UK. And she was the eldest child of 3. She's got 2 younger brothers. She was the apple of her dad's eye. And she did face a lot of, I'm not sure what word to use here. She had a lot of challenges growing up because she was so fair and beautiful living in a place like India. And so she got a lot of unwanted attention, and that used to scare her mum quite a bit. And then her dad went to Africa to work, and so her mum was alone with the 3 children. So she was very, very protected and kept in a bubble. And in her own words now, she often says because of that, she was very naive. But she's amazing. I mean, she, was one of those people when she was very respectful. She could, she was a great cook. She could sew. Like everybody loved her. And she was very, very attached to her grandmother. So my great-grandmother, who actually was alive until I was almost 18. So it was really nice to be able to have that relationship with her. So she grew up in Hyderabad, and then when she was about 16, she went to Bombay at the time, and she was staying with her aunt, and her aunt's not her mum's sister, but her mum's much younger sister, so not much older than her. And she was staying with her, and I think her aunt could see like she would get all this attention and called her mum up, and I was like, I'm sorry, I can't take responsibility for this girl. They were like, what do we do now? And my mum was also, an overachiever. I mean, she kind of finished what was her A-level equivalent when she was like 15, because for her, she wanted to get that education. And so she then moved across to Liberia, because that's where her mum had moved to be with her dad, who was working in Africa. And then that's where my parents met.
Was she very young when she married?
Yeah, she was very young. So she kind of knew my dad socially, but they did have a semi-arranged marriage. She got married at 21. She had me at 22. She had my brother at 23. So yeah, I had a really young mum growing up.
But that's fun.
Yeah,
it must be fun.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, it's great now because with my son, she's a really young grandmom, so she had lots of energy and just could spend time with him, go to the park with him, run around with him.
Where does she live now? Where are they?
So, funnily enough, they moved back to Lagos as well, but about almost 2 years ago. So they moved before I did, and actually that was one of the reasons I wanted to move back, so that my son had family around.
Oh, that's beautiful. Is she a happy grandmother? How is she doing now?
Yeah, she's great. She's like a super social, fashionable grandmother, and my son adores her.
Was she always a stay-at-home mom?
Yeah, so this is the really interesting thing. So I think my mum saw her mum, who, although she was very educated, she was a teacher, chose not to work and to be at home and didn't really understand what was going on in her husband's business. And so with that came its own challenges. And so I think when my mum before she got married was working. She was working for a pharmacy. And then when she got married, she said that I want to get married to someone who I can grow with both personally and in work. So when she got married, obviously she had me very quickly, followed by my brother. So initially she didn't work. But when they moved to the UK, she set up her own business and she ran it. And then when they moved to Lagos, she ran the business with my dad. So while he was the very hands-on person kind of doing it because they're in the flavor and fragrance business, she was the one behind the scenes. She was the one who did the numbers, who had the accounting packages open, who could acknowledge acknowledge is not the right word, but account for, all the figures. So they very much grew their business together because that was really important to her.
Tell me a little bit more about flavor and fragrance business.
So when they got married, my dad had a business that was producing, I think, alcoholic beverages. And with that, there was a flavor component. And so when they moved back to Nigeria and they thought about how they were going to set up a new business, he kind of pulled on that experience and those contacts in order to start their own business. So they do flavors for the food and beverage industry. And so they really started and built the business from the ground up. But like I said, it was one of those things that they did together, and it was very important to my mum to work. But saying that, and this is kind of one of the lessons she taught me, and that was the importance of giving your children time. It was really crucial to her. So even if it meant she had to work after hours or whatever it was, she was always around. She was around in the morning. She picked us up, from school or from where our school bus dropped us. She was very much around. And even when we went to boarding school, in Lagos, a lot of the mums back then would play cards like rummy every day. They still do. And they'll play Monday through to Saturday. But when we'd and no matter what, they would play. But when we'd come back from boarding school, my mum would say, my kids are here, so count me out for the summer. And she wouldn't play, or she wouldn't go to the office. It was very much like, my kids are here, they need my time. And she was always around, and I just remember her always being there and prioritizing us. But I will say the caveat with that is that I wish she kind of modeled the importance of giving herself time as well, because now she will tell me that when it comes to raising my son, she's like, of course you have to give him time, but you have to give yourself time first. But I think it was also just a different time. Back then, moms didn't always, they prioritized their kids far more than they prioritized themselves.
Mm. I want to ask you, you told me that was a semi-arranged marriage. Did she ever talk to you about it?
Yeah, so when I say semi-arranged, they sort of knew each other because they were in similar social circles. And I think my dad, kind of got to about 21, 22. He had started this business. It was doing well, and he decided that he wanted to get married. And so rather than, back then that you decided you wanted to get married wherever you lived, and then you tended to go to India, and then you'd be introduced by various family members or friends to someone, and maybe you'd have a short courtship and decide that that's what you wanted to do, and that's who you want to marry. It was very common. I can count on one hand how many people I know who sort of had a quote-unquote love marriage where they met each other on their own. But back then it was quite common. But with my dad, because he was born in West Africa and then raised in the UK, he didn't want to do the whole I'm going to go to India and find a bride sort of thing. And my mum was already living in Liberia. So even though she'd grown up in India, she was in Liberia by then. And so, he's like, I've seen this girl. And so
she's beautiful.
She's beautiful. I've seen her at the pharmacy. She's working. Like she's not like a lot of, other girls there. And I will say both my parents, had a lot of attention from sort of other suitors. But they found each other, and it was quite simple, actually. And my parents always joke about this because my paternal grandparents went over to my maternal grandparents' house, and they said, okay, well, let the two of them talk. And they went into a room and spent some time talking. And apparently when they came out, the parents were like, so what do you say? And my parents always joke. My mom always jokes and says, because my dad came out and said, she says yes, I say yes. And my mom's like, I never actually said yes. You said yes for me. But actually next month is their 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, amazing.
So they've been married for almost 40 years.
But so semi-arranged is basically that the families agreed to the union.
Yeah. So it's the family agrees, and it's funny because now I can't imagine that's like. Like I understand because nowadays it still exists, arranged marriage, but it's more like someone will introduce you and then you'll take 6 months to get to know each other. But they were introduced in September. They had an engagement and they were married in November. So in that kind of 7 weeks time, my mum flew to India with her family, got all her wedding stuff, because you have in Indian weddings, you have multiple outfit changes and occasions, and got all their stuff and came back, and they got married in Liberia itself.
Mm-hmm. And they're still happy together.
Yeah.
Amazing.
like all marriages, it's not without its challenges.
Of course.
But they're very happy together, and they understand each other. I think that's what's most important. They understand what the other person needs.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that was like that from the beginning?
Oh no, definitely not.
Oh, so they learned. Did they learn to understand each other? That's interesting.
Yeah, they've learned it, and this is what I kind of alluded to earlier. Like we all kind of live our lives based on our version of the world, and they had such different upbringings. I mean, my dad was sent to boarding school at the age of 5 in the UK, not even like near London, but all the way on the border of Wales. That was a really tough time because he saw his family once a year, and other than that, he stayed with guardians during the when they had shorter breaks, because they couldn't. And my dad is one of 7, so they couldn't all afford to go home every time. So once a year they would see their parents. And my mum, on the other hand, was the only girl of 3 children, the eldest child, completely protected and doted on by everybody in her family. So it's like stark opposites. So they did have to kind of learn what the other needed based on their life experiences.
Let's learn from her. What do you feel are the most important lessons or things you've learned from her?
Yes, I think one of the most important things, and it really sticks out for me, especially now that I have a son, and she used to say, give your children values and wings. You know, traditionally with a lot of South Asian parents, they can be a little bit controlling and have trouble letting go because there's this idea that you're the child, I'm the adult, or I'm the elderly person. You must respect me. You must do as I say. No matter what you think, you must listen to what I think as being more important. And I think with my mom, for her, it was okay. You have to have certain values, and she would instill that in us, whether it was like when we were at school, working hard, doing our best, or even if it was more like religious values. But, it was important to have these values, but you had to give your children wings. So they had to be able to go out there and make mistakes, but also knowing that there was a huge safety net under them. Like, you couldn't see the safety net, but it was there. But I'm so grateful for that because it allowed me kind of the opportunity to try different things and also to know that should I make a mistake, should I want to pivot, should I quote unquote fail, that it's okay, and that I had my core values to come back to.
I'm trying to think if I have more questions about this, but you said it all.
Yeah. But speaking of the faith and stuff, like I said religious, but I'm not religious now. I'm deeply spiritual. But growing up, I suppose I wouldn't say affect, but Hinduism was a big part of my life. So I went to the temple. I learned about the culture. I had certain superstitions and beliefs that that were passed down onto me, all of which I've questioned now, and so I wouldn't call myself religious anymore. But even if you take away the sort of religious part of it, I think another lesson that she taught me, which I have now, it's just instead of calling it certain like God, I call it the universe. But that is to have faith in something bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. So growing up, it was maybe in a Hindu idol, but still that kind of thing of having faith in something bigger than yourself is something that she passed down, that there is something that we can't see that guides us and takes us through life, and that if we lean into, is able to give us what we need, or at least give us some peace in the way that we live our life. And so, like I said, I'm not religious, so now I call it the universe, but I have very strong faith in that, and that I see as something that's larger than me, that I'm able to lean into, to seek strength from when I need it.
Did it help you in life?
Yeah, it definitely has. And in fact, I've had quite a roller coaster ride with religion, because I feel like when I was married, or going through the process of marriage, and even though I wanted to listen to my gut, instead I chose to listen to a sort of quote unquote guru, like a holy person. And I look back now and think, I wish I'd listened to myself. But I mean, I have no regrets. But later on, when I kind of went through the divorce and to take personal responsibility, I gave myself that power back. And that's truly helped me through my life. And that's where the faith in the universe has come, because now I have such trust that everything that's happening is for me and not to me. And with that, that's helped carry me over the last 9 years, single-handedly raising my son.
When you say I'm not religious, does she have an issue with that, or is that okay with her?
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, she doesn't have an issue with that. She is not, I'd say, as religious as she used to be. So I think over time, and also as we evolve, we read more books, we see a more Western spin on, more traditional views. Like she always says that Eckhart Tolle's book is very much based on, the Gita. It's just that it's in a more digestible version that can be understood in the West. So as she's read more, she's evolved more too. So there's many traditions, for example, that certain prayers that she did when we were children that she doesn't do to the same degree anymore. But no, she's very respectful of the fact that I'm not religious and don't really kind of follow the Hindu faith anymore.
Do we have more lessons from her?
Well, we don't have another lesson, but there is one thing that I do wish that she taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really thinking about this because sometimes, and I see this very much within my relationship coaching as well, sometimes this can be seen as a really good thing. So that's tolerance. So, my mom was very tolerant. Her dad was very tolerant. I was very tolerant. And while I think that can be a great thing, I think there's a very fine line between being tolerant and just accepting things that shouldn't be happening. And I see that within, especially in the South Asian community, when people come to see me, and there's a lot of women who are really upset, and they'll be like, I did everything. I made the sacrifices. I was great to my mother-in-law. I looked after the children. I took care of my husband. I ran my home. Like, I did everything I had to do. I was so tolerant of everyone. And yet this happened. And I think that's where boundaries come in. And that's where sometimes tolerance allows us to enable the behavior of other people, which shouldn't be happening. And so while I got that kind of tolerance from her, what I wish, she taught me, and which in later life she has realized, was that, yes, you need to be tolerant, but you should not just accept anything that anyone does to you in the name of tolerance.
This is so fascinating. You're mentioning this because my last published episode 103, with the wonderful Kathy Hanauer, a best-selling author from America, this is exactly what we talked about, because her mom...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she wrote this beautiful essay that I read somewhere. And then I thought, I have to invite this amazing lady to my podcast. And thankfully she said yes. And the essay and our conversation is about her mom and her father being very a narcissistic and controlling person, over-controlling, and overbearing. So it sounds like the whole family was actually suffering under his temperament and character. And this mom, with which kids don't feel, she just accepted too much. She did not protect the children or protect herself, and just accepted this. So it was fascinating for me. I come from divorced parents where my mom at one point said, no, thank you. This is too much. I was very fascinated exactly with this. How much is too much? How much should we tolerate, and that's positive, and accept in a positive way? And when does it become martyrdom, or even damaging? So I'm very... It's beautiful. You just told us about it.
Yes, I will go back and listen to that episode. Actually, I'd love to listen to it. But yeah, it's also so common. Like I said, because of what I do now, I see it come up all the time, and it's still happening in that, like, we tell little girls, and I don't want to speak for all communities, but I definitely notice this in the South Asian community, we let boys get away with a lot more. And we tell little girls, like, oh, that's okay if they do that, or you should share that, or don't worry if they say that. And actually, I think we need to empower both boys and girls. So girls to say, no, that's not okay. And boys to understand that that's not okay. So that when they grow up, we don't have this same issue where we just have women just tolerating things that they really shouldn't be tolerating.
Absolutely. Empower them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So important. Do we have anything more?
I think that was the gist of it. the main points.
So the main points we talked about were giving your children values, but also wings. I love it how you said that the children have to feel they're allowed to make mistakes. But there's always an invisible safety net. And this is, I think, for me personally, as a parent, this was the most important lesson I learned through this 100, and I don't even know how many interviews in the meantime. Women who are very grateful to their mothers and love their mothers a lot always talk about this safety net. And especially, I love it how you said invisible. Many women say unconditional, or not pushing themselves and their values and their expectations, but just being this place you can always run back to and get support from and love from when you need.
And just to add to that, the reason I don't like to say unconditional is because, and a lot of people say, I love you unconditionally, or parents love unconditionally. And I think that's a word we use, but I'm not sure I agree with it. There's always some conditions. And also with the word unconditionally, like your parents will love you unconditionally, I think it's almost like this idea that they have to be okay with everything that you do. And they don't have to be okay with everything that you do. Like, they can still love you and not be okay with it. And so, yeah, I'm not sure anybody can love anyone unconditionally. I feel like there's always going to be some conditions to that. But yeah, definitely having that invisible safety net allows you to go out and explore and fail, just knowing that there's a safe space for you to come home to, right? So you go off and fly with your amazing wings, but that you can fly back home when you need to. And it's interesting that that's what she raised us with, because that's definitely how I felt then when I did make the decision to leave my marriage and come home with my 15-month-old, that I had a safe space to come back to, because there are a lot of women I speak to who don't leave because they can't, because they don't have that safe space to go back to.
We also spoke about faith and how important that is in life, to have this feeling. Oh, that was a dog.
Sorry about that. We got a little puppy. He's 3 months today, actually. I think he's trying to get my attention.
He is. Okay, we'll finish very quickly so you can go back to the puppy. So we spoke about faith in something bigger than yourself. You called it universe, and you told me how much that helps you in life and all the challenges you went through. And then something you wish she taught you, this beautiful, beautiful and deep and very important topic about tolerance, which can be positive versus just accepting things, even if they're damaging you, which is negative. So finding the right balance between how much do we tolerate, how much is acceptance positive, and when does it become destructive. I think that was it.
Yeah, and just to add, I think that something I've spoken to my mom a lot about, which I think she is grateful for, is I think if anything, I taught her that. So she knew there was a lot of challenges I was facing and things that I was going through, which probably weren't really acceptable when I was married, and kind of breaking that generational cycle that many, my mom, my grandma, my great-grandmom just kind of lived with, all in the name of tolerance. I think breaking that was inspiring and taught her something, because I have noticed that now she does prioritize herself. She does make sure that she's kind of doing her thing, making her choices, putting herself first in a way that she didn't before. So she's still very much about all of us, making sure everyone's okay, but she will prioritize herself now. So I'm actually grateful that I was able to teach her that lesson.
I want to do a special episode about what did our moms learn from us, or interview moms about what they learned from their daughters.
I think that would be really great.
It would. Natasha, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Anna. It was my pleasure.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyoumama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.